Usually the early round of drafts, they're a breeze. Usually I know who I want rounds 1, 2, 3. I mean, every single year it's like, okay, the draft kind of starts once you get to round 6. Then things go off the board. This year, that's not the case. This year, you get past round 1. I'm sitting here in round 2 and going, every single one of these guys sucks. Every single one of these guys in round 2 feel like they're the exact same as the guys that I'm looking at in round 4. But what sucks is in your redraft league, in your underdog best ball draft, I can't sit here in round 2, trade back and try to pick up some extra value. No, you have to take somebody. So we're going to go through, we're going to talk about all these guys in round 2, who to target, who to avoid, and most importantly, at the end of the video, we'll talk about some overall strategy that should actually probably help you out here. But first guy that we're going to talk about here, we'll go from top to bottom. So we'll get to Devon Achane last. Let's start with Marvin Harrison Jr. It's the wide receiver that right now is wide receiver 9 off the board, ADP of 13.5. Now, I want to be on record. Harrison, literally an absurd prospect. You go through, you look at what film grinders are saying. They are just shedding tears at how beautiful his routes are. We go over to his production profile. The man had like a 20% touchdown rate, number 1 in the class. You go and look at what he did from a market share perspective, his yards per route run, his targets per route run, pretty much any market share number that you're going to look at, he is top 3 in the class. And that's at Ohio State, where you're having to go up against other 5-star wide receivers and compete for targets. That's with another wide receiver in this room going to go round 1 in the 2025 NFL draft. So Harrison, an absurd prospect. And I started playing Dynasty back in 2014. Now, of course, in 2014, I'm just an idiot kid in high school. I'm still an idiot kid now, but nonetheless, I'm not going to sit here and act like I was a genius back then in evaluating these guys, but I have been looking at college wide receivers coming into the NFL and trying to evaluate it from a dynasty perspective since back then. And I'll say pretty confidently that Amari Cooper was really the only other rookie wide receiver I ever remember seeing this much hype for. And that was back in 2015. So it is understandable that Harrison gets the draft capital. He's a phenomenal prospect, gets a good landing spot going over to Arizona where the passing volume should be there for him to be pretty expensive, right? But if we go through history and we look at the most expensive rookie wide receiver ADPs, last year, Jackson Smith-Njigba, the wide receiver 28 off the board. The other guys that went inside the top 30 wide receivers their rookie seasons, this isn't finishes. This is where they were ADP their rookie year. You had CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver 29, Devonta Smith, wide receiver 29, Amari Cooper, wide receiver 17. But really, we've never seen anybody be this expensive before. Now, there are a couple different things. One, obviously, you should have been drafting the hell out of these rookie wide receivers in years past. Because typically these are going to be guys that start off slow, but they finish strong in the year. And you need those points in weeks 15, 16, 17, especially for these underdog tournaments. So yeah, I mean, these rookie wide receivers have been underpriced in years past, and you should have been drafting the hell out of them. But for us to go from about an average of like the rookie wide receiver that's going off the board is a low end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3 in these drafts, to then me seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. round 1, of course I can't guarantee anything. I'm sitting here and guessing here, as we all are. But I'm going to be drafting literally all offseason every single day on Underdog. And with me drafting every single day, I am confident in saying that Harrison's a wide receiver that I am not going to be drafting at these prices, because typically what I've seen in years past, especially with best ball tournaments that launch in May and everybody starts drafting in May and then everybody keeps drafting till August, is when we're in May, everybody's looking at these rookies and only thinking about the final 3 weeks and what they can be. We're all so close to the NFL draft. We're all so damn excited. But when we get to August, when we get to September, typically what happens is people grab their spreadsheets, they start putting out projections, and a lot of drafters, and it literally just will go through and show on whatever app you're drafting, will start putting out median projections for these offenses. And what happens is these rookies, naturally, their median projection is going to be a bit lower, where obviously the range of outcomes is wider and they do have the elite level ceiling, that it makes sense to draft them. But what happens a lot of times, especially at this ADP, I'm confident in saying it's probably going to happen, is when that median projection's out and it's a lot lower than the other wide receivers in round 2, I think we see Harrison fall down these drafts. And instead of going at the 1-2 turn as he is in drafts right now, I think when we get closer to August, he's maybe going to be going in the middle to the end of the second round. So I'm not drafting him at all right now because there's no world in my mind where he moves up and he's like a mid-round 1 pick by the time it gets to August. So I'll draft some Harrison later in the offseason if his price does come down. But to pay the most expensive or rookie wide receiver price by a country mile, I mean, we've never seen anything like this. I do think that it's really aggressive to be doing right now. But let's go over to another option that we potentially have. This is Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley, ADP 15.3 on Underdog, RB5. And with Barkley, I mean, if we go through and look at what he did this past year in New York, he was 26 years old. And I mean, hell, he averaged about 70 rushing yards per game, 17 and a half receiving yards per game. He played 13, averaged 15 and a half fantasy points per game. And if you're going to look at other 26-year-old running backs that have similar seasons to Saquon Barkley since the year 2000 with the road of his screener, you have phenomenal names on here. Carlos Hyde, Chris Johnson, Reggie Bush, Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, elite level RBs. So don't say like, oh, Mason, this would never happen to Barkley. He's an elite talent himself. Yeah, other running backs on this list were as well. What we saw from the running backs that had this age 26 season, the following year, their age 27 season, is anywhere from about 9.8 fantasy points per game up to 16 fantasy points per game with a median output of 13. Median output of 13 points per game kind of makes you an RB2 in fantasy. Now, am I going to sit here and say, oh, Saquon Barkley is an RB2 in fantasy? Of course not. We have to draft someone, right? But it's a starting point to show you, yeah, I mean, history's not on the side. Now, we will have a couple different things here. Obviously, massive transition going from the Giants, going over to Philadelphia. I mean, the Giants, horrendous. Just absolute dog water. I mean, one of the worst offenses in the NFL. Horrible offensive line, horrible quarterback play, horrible across the board. In Philly, this will be improved. The offensive line will be better, even with no Jason Kelce. It's not going to be worse than the Giants were. You will have Jalen Hurts. I mean, Jalen Hurts obviously looked not great in the second half of the year, but I can guarantee he's going to be better than what the Giants had. And this offense will have more trips to the red zone, will score more points, will have more sustained drives. So that's all phenomenal news for Saquon Barkley. Now, let's go over and let's look at what the running back did in this situation last year. DeAndre Swift last year played 16 games. DeAndre Swift last year had 6 touchdowns total. Is it because Swift is a bum? Well, Chicago doesn't think so. Chicago just gave him a ton of money. No, a big reason is Jalen Hurts takes rushing touchdowns. And at the same time, we know DeAndre Swift, I mean, is a phenomenal receiving back, right? DeAndre Swift back in Detroit in 13 games this second year had 78 targets. DeAndre Swift in Philadelphia through 16 games had 49 targets. DeAndre Swift wasn't usable in fantasy last season. Now, am I saying Saquon's going to be just that? No, of course I'm not saying that. I think Saquon Barkley is a much better running back than DeAndre Swift was. But it does go to show that when you have this rushing quarterback in Jalen Hurts, where Jalen Hurts is going to take rushing touchdowns, he's not really going to check the ball down. It's not as good of a situation on the surface as it initially appears. Plus, you have Saquon Barkley, aging running back, going to be 27 this year. We know that the age cliff is coming for these RBs. Plus, if we look at the historical data, ton of red flags for Barkley. I will say I'm kind of drafting Barkley a bit, though, just because who else are we taking in this range? Going over to our next guy, looking at Drake London. This is a wide receiver that his best season of his NFL career was 56 receiving yards per game. He's played 33 games. He's had 6 touchdowns. And now he has an ADP of wide receiver 10, and he's going at big 15. Yes, obviously, we all know in years past, Atlanta had horrendous quarterback play. It was literally the Atlanta Falcons and the Chicago Bears. They were a laughingstock in the NFL in terms of the overall passing volume that you expected from a week-to-week perspective. Now, you go over to Kirk Cousins, who on the other hand, Kirk Cousins racks up passing volume as if it's Madden. I mean, it is absurd, just the raw amount of pass attempts, the raw amount of passing yards, the raw amount of passing touchdowns we've seen from Cousins through his NFL career. Obviously, it's a benefit for these receivers when you have that quarterback that's not really going to run the ball. So pretty much any way that they move the ball down the field when it's a passing play is through the air. So it's a significantly better situation for Drake London. If you are looking at London, one thing that's worth pointing out is how young he is. Drake London's going into year 3 of his NFL career. And let's cross-reference these two guys because somebody that y'all know I give a hard time to is going to be Tank Dell. Drake London. Oh, this is funny. Drake London was born in 2001. And Tank Dell was born in 1999. Tank Dell, the rookie last year, was born 2 years before Drake London. So Drake London's still incredibly young. If you look at wide receivers to have a similar age 22 season to Drake London with the road of his screener, you have Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin freaking popped off in 2019. 19.5 points per game. DK Metcalf, the following year, 17 points per game. Deshaun Jackson, the following year, 17 points per game. Stephon Diggs, the following year, 15 points per game. Andre Johnson, the following year, 14.5. Christian Kirk, Torrey Smith, Darius Lee. So if I'm sitting here and looking at Drake London, it is absurd to think that a wide receiver that has never been viable in fantasy football going into year 3 is now someone you have to take at the 1-2 turn. But it's understandable. I think if you look at the trajectory he's on for how young he is, if you look at how his situation's changed as well, it's a very expensive price. Am I excited to pay it? But as we go through these other options, I'm not that excited about anybody here. I'm going over to Jonathan Taylor. I mean, with Jonathan Taylor, one, he lost us a lot of money last year, so that's not too exciting. But, I mean, come on. Let's move on. Let bygones be bygones. If we are looking at Taylor's running back that gets a massive contract, but over the past 2 years, he's done nothing in fantasy. Past 2 years, the man has played 21 games. He's had about 1,500 total rushing yards. I can't stop thinking about 2021, though, when the man had 1,800 rushing yards, which is insane. If you look at Taylor, still pretty young, going into his age 25 season. If we look at 24-year-old running backs that put up similar years to Jonathan Taylor this past year, you have names like Aaron Jones, DeMarco Murray, Matt Forte, Marion Barber, Lamar Miller. This is all from a per-game perspective, but even then, I'm not really comfortable comparing Taylor historically, just given how weird his season was last year. I am going to let you know I'm drafting a crap ton of Jonathan Taylor at the moment. Just because these other wide receivers in this range, I don't really know what to think about them. I understand where their upside is coming from, but I also understand the red flags that are associated with them as well. Where with Jonathan Taylor, the main concerns that you were going to have centered around, one, the injuries we've had over the past 2 years, him not really producing, and two, similar to the concerns that you would have with Saquon Barkley, the rushing quarterback in Anthony Richardson taking rushing touchdowns, as well as not having a high checkdown rate overall. Now, a couple different things. One, on Underdog, you may get stuck taking these receivers, right? On Underdog, wide receiver is going to get pushed up. Two, if you're in your regular redraft format where you only start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, for the love of God, be taking these 2 running backs over the wide receivers. There, it's undoubtable. That's the decision you have to make. You have to take Barkley. You have to take Taylor over the receivers. On Underdog, I'm still taking Barkley and Taylor over the receivers in this range, but it's understandable why people are taking the receivers to set themselves up in the middle rounds to potentially go with some value. We'll talk about the strategy at the very end. And if you would have struggled with me making this pick, we're doing it on Underdog Fantasy every single night on the live stream. Yeah, Underdog's best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the year. So I draft hundreds of teams every offseason. It's how I live stream every single day these drafts. I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. It's available in damn near every state. And if you want to draft with me, if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250 on a new account. Plus, you'll get my 2024 fantasy football rankings and a special pick'em, something like Luka Doncic, more than less than half a total point. Now, going over to Brandon Ayuk, I mean, this is just an older wide receiver, going to be 26 years old this season. Obviously, he's been here for quite some time. Wide receiver last year, best year of his NFL career by far. I mean, right? 1,300 receiving yards with 16 games played. I mean, 70 receiving yards per contest. Outside of that, you're looking at a wide receiver that sitting at 62, 48, 59 receiving yards per game. But I mean, for his 25-year-old comps last year, you had Brandon Cooks, Michael Crabtree, Mike Wallace, Miles Austin, Amari, Cooper Kupp, Eric Decker, Calvin Ridley, Tyreek Hill. So you have very high ceiling here. I mean, the following year, Calvin Ridley was at 19 points per game. Tyreek Hill was at 22 points per game. Now, the issue that you potentially have with Brandon Ayuk is they take Slicky Ricky, Sticky Ricky, Dicky Ricky, whatever you want to call him. They take a wide receiver in round 1. The contract situation that you have with Ayuk plus Debo, it's just very difficult to figure out what's going to happen here. I think while of course it looks less likely now that one of Debo or Brandon Ayuk are moved now that the NFL draft's over, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get traded post NFL draft. I still think it's a possibility. So if you were taking Ayuk in this range and then Ayuk gets shipped off to Carolina, it can be a spot where you see an absolute plummet with his ADP. Now going over to Chris Olave. Olave's, I don't want to say he's never been great in fantasy. As a rookie player, he comes out and he's really impressive, right? I mean, he makes us so excited for him year two. I mean, I want to say right now, Chris Olave is very, very talented. This is a wide receiver that's only played 2 years and he's averaging 70 receiving yards per game. I mean, Chris Olave averaged the same amount of receiving yards per game essentially as what you saw with Brandon Ayuk. I mean, he averaged more than Ayuk at either 22, 23, 24 years old. Ayuk at 84 receiving yards per game this past season was the most we've seen. But let's go back over to Olave, where Olave has proven his talent through the first 2 seasons. The issue, of course, is where he was drafted last year and the production just didn't come close to it. And if we're mapping this out going forward, with Garrett Wilson, it's very easy to say, okay, Garrett Wilson has proven his talent, and Garrett Wilson all of a sudden has a massive quarterback upgrade going from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. Chris Olave last year had 5 receiving touchdowns through 16 games, and he's going from Derek Carr to Derek Carr. Nothing's changed. This is still a horrendous situation. If you look at his 23-year-old season, you have some pretty good comps. You have Larry Fitz, you have Stephon Diggs, you have Jeremy Maclin, you have Andre Johnson. You also have some grosser comps like Michael Gallup and DJ Chark. I would be all in on Olave here if it wasn't for the quarterback playing. Going over to Davante Adams. To be completely honest with you, before we did the research a few weeks back, I thought Davante Adams was going to be someone that we are drafting a ton of. I thought Davante Adams was going to be the answer of what you wanted to do here in round 2. And no, you don't. I mean, yes, you have Gardner Minshew coming over. Minshew's not great. Okay. He threw the ball a lot to Michael Pittman last year, and it was fine, but you're not excited about Gardner Minshew being your quarterback going into the season. If we go through and look at Davante Adams, he played his age 31 season last year. And if we compare him historically to 31-year-old wide receivers that had a similar type season, you had Jimmy Smith, Hines Ward, Donald Driver, Eric Moulds, TJ Hushmanzada, Roddy White, Santana Moss, Torrey Holt. So you have very good wide receivers here. And the median output for their age 32 seasons was about 11, 12 points per game. And I would be sitting here going, no, I'm going in on Davante Adams. If the Raiders went and got Kirk Cousins, if the Raiders went and got Kirk Cousins and not Gardner Minshew, I would say we're going to ignore this historical data. The quarterback upgrades there, and I think he's going to be able to outpace what all these other guys did at 32. But the issue is you go from bad quarterback play to pretty bad quarterback play. I don't want to act like Gardner Minshew's a downgrade, but it's not a massive upgrade. Now going over to Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams is a running back that I completely whiffed out on last year. I mean, if you wanted to win massive money in underdog tournaments, you needed to draft Kyren. Did I? No. Sadly, I was not smart enough to draft him in round 18. And Kyren Williams last year made us pay for it with only 12 games played. I mean, the man goes out and he has 1,300 yards from scrimmage. He leads the NFL in 95 rushing yards per game. I mean, in only 12 games played, he has 15 total touchdowns. Definition of a league winner. He does this at only 23 years old. If you look at the comps, some running backs at 23 years old to have this type of season, Chris Johnson, Jamal Lewis, Adrian Peterson, LaShawn McCoy, David Montgomery, Matt Forte's on this list. You have phenomenal running backs. You also have like Najee Harris. So it is what it is. But if you are looking at Kyren Williams, the issue that you would have with Williams is at the end of the day, the main reason I whiffed on him last year, I don't even feel that bad about, to be honest with you, is we've never seen a running back this small and this slow at the NFL Combine be an RB1 in fantasy. It had never happened before Kyren Williams. So the base level here with Kyren is he is already a massive outlier. A lot of times when you see these massive outliers like Philip Lindsay, which I just want to say Kyren Williams is way better than Philip Lindsay ever was, way better than James Robinson ever was. Let's get that on record. But you do see them come back down to earth just a bit. And if we are looking at Kyren, they draft Blake Corum on day 2 of the NFL draft. That's going to be a big deal here. The team investment that's made into Corum. And with Kyren, given his size, the concern's not that Blake Corum comes out and turns into the starting running back. No, I'm not expecting that to be the case whatsoever. But the concern potentially is Blake Corum comes out and he takes a small portion of this backfield. where it turns from Kyron seeing, a CMC level workload to Kyron all of a sudden, I don't know, being a little more of a typical running back. Now, going over to our next wide receiver, we're looking at Deebo Samuel. With Deebo, season last year, if you look at his comps, it's all fine, right? We know who Deebo Samuel is. Very good wide receiver option. Average 17 points per game last year. It's not super old. This is a wide receiver. It's going to be 28. But the concern is kind of the same thing that you have with Brandon Ayuk, where we don't necessarily know what the exact situation is going to be in San Francisco by the time we get to the start of the season. They take a wide receiver one this year. Obviously, they're having to gear up to get ready to pay Brock Purdy. It's going to be difficult with the contracts that they have with both Ayuk as well as Deebo Samuel and George Kittle. And they go out and take a wide receiver round one, indicating, maybe Brandon Ayuk making all this noise, needing a new contract is something's going to happen here. Of course, I have no idea what it is. And then going over to Nico Collins. Nico Collins, if you look at what he did last year, immaculate. 24 years old. I'm the man who with 15 games played has 1,300 receiving yards. The average is 86.5 receiving yards per game. This is better than what we've ever seen from Brandon Ayuk. If you take away Deebo's rushing, it's better than what we've ever seen from Deebo. But of course, Deebo has the rushing added on. And with Nico Collins, you have elite level quarterback play. But the issue is all of a sudden you add in historically a wide receiver that has dominated the target share in his offense. And if Stephon Diggs is not dominating the target share in his offense, he is going to be making a mess. He is going to be making some noise. He will be a tad bit upset. So the issue in Nico Collins here is if we have Dell, if you have Diggs, if you have Schultz, what is the target distribution and how much of that is Stephon Diggs soaking up in comparison to what we had last year? Plus, if we're looking at Nico with the prior 2 years, he just did absolutely nothing. Going over to our last guy here with Devon Achane. Made an entire video talking about why you should sell Achane in Dynasty before the NFL draft. Now it's going to be a little bit too late. Now you are seeing Achane fall. Underdog, I believe, opened up the tournament and Achane was a mid-second round pick. The tournaments before the NFL draft, he was an early second rounder. And now in a lot of these Underdog drafts, I'm seeing Devon Achane fall to the third round. And I want to say Devon Achane was in a absurdly talented running back last year. So running back that averaged 18 points per game. This is a running back that had 11 touchdowns through 11 games. And he had 11 touchdowns with 130 touches. So if we take a step back and look at what Achane did, it was amazing. 7.8 yards per carry. Now, we understand, based off all historical analysis that's ever been made regarding fantasy football, that if a running back goes out there and he has a touchdown rate close to 10%, if a running back goes out there and is averaging 7-8 yards per carry, he will come back down to earth. He will regress. But typically, it doesn't matter because the efficiency will fall while the volume will go up. So if the volume goes up, even if Achane were to fall from 8 yards per carry down to 5 yards per carry, it's all good. He's going to go from averaging, say, 9 carries per game to 15, 16 carries per game, and he's going to be even better. That's typically what we expect with rookies. But Devon Achane is tiny. Tiny, tiny, tiny. Let's go ahead and let's pull this up because I am concerned essentially that he is not going to be able to go through and he's not going to be able to see the increase in workload. He's 5'9", 188 pounds with a BMI of 27.8. Puts him in the 11th percentile. And if you look historically, these kind of running backs, the only way that they're an RB1 in fantasy, unless they average 8 yards per carry, which if Achane does that through the rest of his career, he will go down in the NFL history as the best running back to ever play the game. If he averages 8 yards per carry in the modern day for his entire career, it's not happening. And the running backs this small don't see a full workload. So the only way it happens is if you're like Tariq Cohen and you're pretty much like a wide receiver that runs the ball sometimes. but he only had 37 targets last year. And they take Jalen Wright this year in the NFL draft. So HN does look like a massive outlier. So what I'm doing in drafts right now, to be completely honest with you, if it is just that regular redraft league, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, and a flex, for the love of God, be taking the running backs. Like, there's no reason for you to ever be taking Marvin Harrison Jr. at the 1-2 turn in your regular redraft league. In these underdog best ball tournaments where you can get Josh Jacobs in round 4, where you can get Travis Etienne in round 4, if you prefer those values, you kind of have to pick and choose. You have to ask yourselves, would I rather have the combination of round 2 Drake London and round 4 Josh Jacobs? Or would I rather have the combination of round 2 Jonathan Taylor and round 4 Zay Flowers? Or round 4 T Higgins? What I've personally been doing so far is when I get the opportunity, I've been going Jonathan Taylor. When I get the opportunity, I've been going Saquon Barkley. I've been taking the running back here, going wide receiver round 4. However, if I'm taking a wide receiver in this range, such as Brandon Ayuk, then it opens you up to the possibility of taking a running back there, or it opens you up the possibility of taking an elite level quarterback, such as Lamar Jackson. Now, the other option that you have is if you want in these underdog tournaments to get unique, where you're selecting at the 1-2 turn, there you go, okay, all these wide receivers are about the same for me right now, where Marvin Harrison Jr. and Deebo Samuel, they're in the same tier. So what I'm going to do, instead of taking Harrison, I'm going to reach on a wide receiver that typically goes at the 2-3 turn. That way I can have a unique build out the start. If I go like, say, A.J. Brown at the end of round 1, and then I go Deebo Samuel at the beginning of round 2, because nobody else typically is going to be going Deebo Samuel there. Even though I have Deebo and Harrison ranked about the same, I'm going to have access to a unique start that not too many other people will in this tournament. So that's the other option for what you can have in these underdog tournaments in particular. Obviously, in a regular redraft league, that just doesn't matter at all to you. But I think that's all I got for you. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day. And yeah, of course, you want to draft with us? We're going to be drafting almost every single day on Underdog Fantasy. You can find that link in the description, comment section. It's best balls to no time committed all during the year. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every offseason. So I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And yeah, if you sign up with code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250, plus my 2024 rankings, plus you're going to be getting a special NBA pick'em, something like Luka Doncic, more than less than half a total point depending on when you sign up. Thank you again. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day.